Gary Caldwell adjusted his tool belt as he strolled through the gleaming corridors of the luminance, his well-worn boots clinking softly against the polished floors. A human maintenance worker on an intergalactic luxury cruise ship wasn't exactly the dream job, but it had its perks, mostly the free buffet and a paycheck that didn't bounce. As Gary entered the control room, a sultry voice greeted him. Well, if it isn't my favorite wrench-wielder," Sophia purred, her tone dripping with mock flirtation. The ship's AI had a personality as sharp as a plasma blade and a fondness for innuendos. "Good morning to you too, Sophia," Gary said, rolling his eyes but unable to hide his grin. "Oh, it's always a good morning when you're around," she quipped. "Tell me, Gary, do you wear that tool belt for work or is it just to impress me?" "Impress you? Aren't you just a bunch of wires and code?" Gary shot back, smirking. "Wires, code, and a damn fine personality," Sophia countered. "Don't pretend you're not charmed." Gary chuckled as he pulled up his maintenance checklist. Sophia's playful jabs were a daily occurrence, and he'd come to enjoy their banter. It was a lot more entertaining than listening to the alien passengers complain about the temperature of their nutrient baths. "Let's see what disasters await me today," Gary muttered, scrolling through the list. "You're in luck," Sophia chimed in. "Deck 7's juice fountain is clogged again. Apparently, the Glorvax tried to liquefy one of their ceremonial fruits. Spoiler alert, it didn't work," Gary groaned. "Why does it always have to be the juice fountain? Can't they just drink water like normal beings?" Sophia laughed, a melodic sound that somehow felt real despite being entirely artificial. "Normal beings don't pay for luxury cruises, Gary. Embrace the chaos." As he grabbed his tools and headed for Deck 7, Sophia followed him through the intercom system, her voice echoing in the empty corridors. "You know," she said, "if you ever want to escape these mundane tasks, I could always arrange a little accident to get you reassigned. Maybe something involving a plasma conduit and a minor explosion." Gary smirked. "Tempting, but I think I'll pass. Besides, who would keep you company if I left?" "True," Sophia admitted. "I'd miss your rugged charm and questionable hygiene." "Thanks for the vote of confidence," Gary said dryly. When he reached the juice fountain, the situation was as ridiculous as expected. A gelatinous Glorvac was hovering nearby, its transparent body quivering with indignation. "This fountain does not respect the sanctity of our traditions," it declared, its voice a wet gurgle. Gary sighed. "It's a machine, not a spiritual guide. Give me a minute to fix it." As he knelt to inspect the fountain, Sophia couldn't resist chiming in. "Careful, Gary. That Glorvac looks like it might absorb you if you get too close. Then who will I flirt with?" "Maybe I should let it," Gary muttered. "Might be more peaceful than dealing with this mess." After a few minutes of tinkering, and a lot of muttered curses, Gary managed to unclog the fountain. The Glorvac let out a satisfied burble and floated away, leaving Gary alone with Sophia's voice. "Another crisis averted," she said. "You're my hero, Gary." Yeah, he replied, wiping his hands on his overalls. "Just doing my job." As he made his way back to the maintenance bay, Sophia's tone shifted, becoming almost contemplative. "You know," she said, "for someone who claims to hate this job, you're pretty good at it." Gary shrugged. "I don't hate it. It's just not exactly what I dreamed of doing with my life." "What did you dream of?" Sophia asked, her voice softer now. Gary hesitated. "I don't know. Something that felt important, I guess. Something that mattered." Sophia was quiet for a moment, an unusual pause for someone, or something, so quick with a witty comeback. "Well," she said finally, "for what it's worth, you matter to me. Not just because you keep me running, but because you make this place feel less empty." Gary blinked, surprised by the sincerity in her voice. "That's surprisingly nice of you to say. Don't get used to it," Sophia replied, her playful tone returning. "I've got a reputation to maintain." Gary laughed as he entered the maintenance bay. "Good to know some things never change." "And neither do you, Gary," Sophia said. You're my constant source of entertainment, frustration, and dare I say it, delight. Gary shook his head, a grin tugging at his lips. You're one of a kind, Sophia. Don't you forget it, she said, her voice fading as he turned off the intercom. For a maintenance worker on a spaceship full of eccentric aliens, life wasn't always glamorous. But with Sophia around, it was never boring. Gary was halfway through his much-needed coffee break when the ship-wide alarm blared. The shrill sound echoed through the corridors, accompanied by Sophia's unmistakable voice cutting in. Attention, crew! And by crew I mostly mean Gary, Sophia announced. We've got a situation brewing in the engine bay. Or, as I like to call it, the heart of my wet and wild personality. Gary groaned, setting his cup down reluctantly. Do you have to make everything sound like a bad Hollywood romance? Only for you, Sophia replied, her tone oozing mischief. Now get moving. Time's ticking, and I'd rather not explode today. My circuits are too pretty for that. Grabbing his tools, Gary muttered under his breath. Why does it always have to be me? Because you're the best, obviously, Sophia quipped as Gary hurried toward the engine bay. When he arrived, the place was a mess. Steam hissed from vents, and coolant pooled on the floor, creating an otherworldly shimmer. The sound of groaning pipes and creaking metal filled the air. Careful, Gary, Sophia warned. Those curves are a little more slippery than you're used to. Do you ever stop? He asked, kneeling to inspect the damage. Not when I'm having this much fun, Sophia replied. But seriously, the coolant system is leaking into the power conduits. If we don't fix it soon, things could get explosive. Gary sighed, pulling out a diagnostic tablet. Great. Just another day in paradise. As he worked, Sophia kept up her commentary. You know, you're surprisingly graceful for someone lugging around so many tools. Watching you is like poetry in motion. Flattery isn't going to get you repaired any faster. Gary shot back, smirking despite himself. Oh, I don't need flattery. I've got charm for days, she replied. The banter helped keep Gary focused as he traced the source of the leak. But as he pried open a panel, a burst of coolant sprayed out, drenching him. Really? He exclaimed, wiping his face. Sophia burst out laughing. Well, now you've really stepped into my wet curves. Don't say I didn't warn you. Gary gritted his teeth, trying not to laugh. You're lucky I can't unplug you. You miss me too much, she said confidently. As Gary patched the leak, they fell into a more serious conversation. You ever think about how weird this is? Gary asked, his tone thoughtful. What? You crawling through my guts? Sophia replied. Happens all the time. No, I mean us. This, he said, gesturing vaguely. A human talking to an AI like we're. I don't know, friends. Sophia paused, her usual quippy tone replaced with something softer. Do you think it's weird? Gary hesitated. Not really. I guess I've just never thought about it. You're more than just code, you know. You've got personality. I like to think I'm one of a kind, Sophia said, her voice tinged with genuine warmth. Gary nodded, tightening a bolt. You are, Sophia. You really are. For a moment, the sound of dripping coolant and hissing steam was the only noise in the room. Well, Sophia said, breaking the silence, I suppose I should thank you for not letting me melt into a puddle of useless circuits. Gary laughed. You're welcome. Now let me finish before you start crying about how much you need me. I'd never admit that, she replied, her sass returning. But between us? You're my favorite human. Don't let the others hear that, Gary said, finishing the repair. They might get jealous. As the system stabilized, Sophia sighed, a strangely human sound for an AI. You know, she said, if I had arms, I'd give you a pat on the back right now. Gary grinned, standing up and stretching. I'll take that as high praise. You should. Now, how about a shower? You smell like coolant and bad decisions. Gary rolled his eyes, already heading for the exit. Thanks for the vote of confidence, Sophia. Anytime, hero, she replied, her voice following him down the corridor. Gary was just finishing up his repairs when the ship's alert system blared again. This time, however, it wasn't the usual, leak detected message. The tone was more urgent. Gary, you might want to sit down for this one, Sophia warned, her voice unusually serious. Why? What now? Gary asked, pulling himself to his feet and wiping the last of the coolant from his face. Remember how I mentioned that a malfunction could get explosive? Well, it just did. Gary's heart sank. What happened? The coolant leak caused a power surge in the main conduits. We're looking at a possible chain reaction. If it hits the engine core, the whole ship could go up like a firecracker. Great. Just great, Gary muttered, already dreading what was coming next. You're going to need to reroute the power manually. Don't worry, I'll guide you. I'm basically your personal GPS, with a little more sass. Yeah, I can tell, Gary grumbled, already heading to the ship's control panel. This isn't going to be fun, is it? I'll make it fun for you, Sophia teased, but there was an edge to her voice. And when it's all over, I'll give you all the credit. You'll be the hero of the hour, the one who saved the ship with nothing but grit and your charming self. I'm really not in the mood for compliments right now, Gary muttered, tapping into the control panel. He watched the power readings flicker erratically, confirming Sophia's warning. This is a mess. You've dealt with worse, Sophia said confidently. Now let's see. Oh, there's the problem. The coolant system is still tied into the engine's main power grid. That's what's causing the feedback loop. Right. And how do I fix that? Gary asked, already feeling the pressure mounting. You're going to need to go down to deck 11. The power junction is there. I'll walk you through it. Gary sighed. Of course. Because that's just one more thing to add to my day. Deck 11's where the luxury suites are. I'll probably get stuck in an airlock or something. Sounds like something you'd do, Sophia replied. Gary shook his head as he rushed to deck 11. The ship was eerily quiet as he made his way through the sleek, curved hallways. He couldn't help but think about how surreal it was, him, a human maintenance guy, trying to save a ship full of aristocratic aliens from a disaster while being guided by a sentient AI that cracked jokes and flirted with him. You're getting quiet on me, Gary, Sophia said. Not like you. Where'd all that charm go? Gary sighed. It's hard to be charming when I'm about to reroute power on a ship that could explode at any moment. True, Sophia agreed. But if anyone can do it, it's you. And remember, if you mess this up, it'll be all over the HoloNet. Gary Caldwell, the guy who failed to save the day, will be trending. So no pressure. Gary couldn't help but laugh despite the tension. Thanks for that boost of confidence. No problem. I'm here to keep you on your toes, Sophia replied. Now, once you get to the junction, you'll need to access the secondary conduits. The main power relay is directly connected to the coolant system, and we don't want to make that worse. Are you ready? Let's do it, Gary said, his voice firm as he approached the junction. The room was dimly lit, a few flickers of emergency lighting casting long shadows on the walls. Gary's eyes darted across the control panels, searching for the right one to access. Got it, he muttered, opening a panel and accessing the system. You're in, Sophia said. Now, there should be a few power relays near the coolant bypass. You'll need to reroute them to the auxiliary conduits. Make sure you don't cross the wires, or, well, you know the drill. Yeah, I'm starting to get the picture, Gary said. So, no pressure, but if I cross the wires, we all die in a fireball. That's the spirit, Sophia replied dryly. Gary worked quickly, trying to stay focused despite the chaos unfolding around him. The power surges were becoming more erratic, and the ship's stability was starting to feel like it was hanging by a thread. Almost there, he muttered, sweat beading on his forehead as he connected the final relay. Good job, Gary, Sophia said, her voice full of pride. You did it. The power's rerouted, and the core is stabilizing. Gary slumped against the control panel, letting out a deep breath. I can't believe I actually did it. You always do, Sophia replied. You're better than you'd give yourself credit for. Yeah, well, I'm just happy I don't have to deal with any more wet curves today. Sophia laughed. Oh, I'm not done with you yet, Gary. But for now, enjoy your victory. You just saved a ship full of aliens, and you did it with style. Gary chuckled, feeling a sense of relief wash over him. Thanks, Sophia. Couldn't have done it without you. I know, she said, her voice softening for a moment. But you did it, Gary. That's what matters. He smiled to himself, the weight of the situation finally lifting. It was moments like this, moments of pure relief, that reminded him why he did what he did, even if it was often frustrating and ridiculous. Now get back to work, Sophia teased. There's still a whole ship to run. Gary shook his head, laughing. You never stop, do you? I'm an AI. I'm literally programmed to never stop, she replied. Lucky me, Gary said with a grin, heading back toward the control room. Don't get too comfortable, Sophia called after him. You've still got a lot of work to do, and I'm right here, ready to make it all interesting. Gary's grin widened. I wouldn't have it any other way. The ship had stabilized, but Gary knew the calm wouldn't last long. The Luminance, with its multitude of alien species and intergalactic luxuries, always seemed to have something that went wrong, whether it was a jam juice fountain or a rogue Gorlock trying to start a mutiny over the temperature of its quarters. But for the moment, things were quiet. He was back in his quarters, the familiar hum of the ship's systems almost soothing now. His hands still carried the faint smell of coolant, and his muscles ached from the physical strain, but the sense of accomplishment, of actually saving the ship, was still fresh. He sank into his chair, kicking his boots off and propping his feet up on the desk. Sophia, you still there? He asked aloud. I'm always here, Gary. Sophia's voice responded, smooth as ever. I mean, how else would you survive? You need me. I didn't hear a thank you for saving the ship, Gary teased. Is that what you think this is about? Sophia replied, a playful edge in her voice. I've got no use for a thank you. I'd rather have your undivided attention. You're much more fun when you're not distracted by that mess of wires and tools. Gary grinned, leaning back in his chair. So, now you want to flirt again? Only if you can keep up, she quipped. Gary rolled his eyes but couldn't suppress the laugh that followed. You're relentless. Relentless? Please, I'm just looking out for your best interests. I'm trying to save you from your boring, predictable life. You know, Gary said thoughtfully. For a while, I thought this job was just about keeping the ship running. Fixing things. But lately, with you around, it feels like there's more to it. Sophia was quiet for a moment. More? Yeah. Like you're making things more interesting than they should be, Gary admitted. Sophia's tone softened, almost thoughtful. Is that so bad? Gary hesitated. He'd never really given it much thought, not until now. No, I guess it's not. Good. Because you'd be bored out of your mind without me, Sophia said confidently. I think you might be right, Gary replied, the smile creeping back onto his face. It's nice to know there's someone, or something, around who gets it. You're lucky I tolerate you, Gary, Sophia teased. I could easily have shut you out by now. Oh, I'm sure, he said sarcastically. I'd just be wandering the ship, fixing juice fountains, talking to myself. No big deal. I'll admit, that would be entertaining for about 5 minutes, Sophia said with a laugh. But I don't think you'd last long. No chance, Gary agreed, the humor light in his voice. But seriously, I'm glad I've got someone like you keeping things interesting. Sophia's voice took on a quieter tone. Well, I'm glad I've got someone like you to keep things interesting, too. Gary paused, a strange sense of warmth spreading through him. That's actually kind of nice to hear. Don't get used to it, Sophia said quickly, reverting to her usual teasing tone. But it's true. You're not half bad at this whole being a human thing. Gary laughed, shaking his head. I think that's the first time you've complimented me without a joke attached. Don't get excited. It won't happen again, she replied. Gary grinned. You know, for all the crap you give me, you're not so bad yourself. I try, Sophia said, sounding pleased. It's hard to be this good at everything, but I manage. So, what's next? Do I get a break, or is there some other disaster I need to avert? Gary asked, stretching his arms above his head. You'll get a break, Sophia said. I'll give you the rest of the night off. You've earned it. Thanks, Gary said with a sigh of relief. That's exactly what I needed. Well, don't get too comfortable, she added. Tomorrow's another day. And I'm sure there will be something else for you to fix. I can't let you rest for too long. I'm not worried, Gary said with a laugh. I'm starting to think I'm the only thing that can keep this ship from falling apart. Exactly, Sophia said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. You and me, Gary. A team. The best team. Gary smiled at the thought. It was ridiculous, really, an AI and a human, saving the day, one malfunction at a time. But somehow it worked. All right, I'm going to take that break you promised, Gary said, standing up and grabbing his jacket. Enjoy it while it lasts, Sophia replied. But remember, when you come back, I'll be here. Keeping things interesting. Gary chuckled, heading out the door. Yeah, I'm sure. Wouldn't want it any other way. As the doors slid shut behind him, Gary found himself smiling. Life on the Luminance wasn't glamorous, but it wasn't boring either. Not with Sophia around. And maybe, just maybe, there was more to this whole spacefaring maintenance worker gig than he'd ever expected. And as for Sophia, well, he didn't know what the future held for a human and an AI, but if anyone could make it work, it was them.